Today, I want to pretend like we're two and ask why. My daughter's providing a very good object lesson of asking why when it matters and not when it doesn't. But I want to ask why a lot today and just keep asking it until it goes out of style. Maybe it'll come back in again. And I want to ask one really big question and keep asking it until we can't ask that question anymore. Why did Jesus die? No, really. Why did Jesus die? Now, this is somewhat of a newbie mistake on my part to try and ask such a big question in one sermon, but we're going to try. Now, it's a historically verifiable fact that Jesus died. And if anything about history is true and documented from the ancient world, it's Jesus' death. And we know for certain that Jesus both lived and died. But why did he die? Really, why did he die? Since we're pretending that we're two, I have a great answer for you. I'll put this question to rest once and for all. We don't even need to listen to the rest of what I wrote. And it was revealed to me by the Holy Spirit through the pages of the most reliable document in the ancient world, the Bible. So, are you ready? Why did Jesus die? He died because he was killed. If you don't know me, my sense of humor is on the obtuse side. But really, Jesus died because he was killed. I know that sounds trivial, but think about it. Most of the people that we know that have died were not killed by other humans. And if you and I are lucky, we also will not be killed by other humans. But Jesus died because he was killed by other humans. And if you know anything about who Jesus is, knowing that he died because he was killed should be deeply troubling. Who would want to kill Jesus? Like, what crime did he commit? Did Jesus deserve to die? Now, Jesus did claim to be God. But is that a good reason for him to die? And who would put themselves in opposition to God and want Jesus dead? Who would claim greater authority than God and choose to kill Jesus? So, to put it another way, whose authority put Jesus to death and why? Jesus died because he was killed. It's pretty simple, right? We're going to find out. Just keep listening. Should go see mommy, though. So let's keep pretending that we're two and ask why some more. There's another kind of why that we need to ask. And maybe more important than asking why Jesus died as a way to understand what caused him to die, we should also ask why Jesus died as a way to understand what it means that Jesus died. Like, what did he accomplish by dying? Christianity is a strange religion because we're the only religion that celebrates the death of its founder. Like, who does that? Why would anybody do that? Well, can you imagine someone going up and being like, guys, guess what? Good news. Jesus died. It's like, what? Are you Christians okay? Do you need a moment? It's like, no, seriously, it's good news. Jesus died. These Christians are crazy. But it's true that if Jesus died and that was the end of the story, it would not be good news. It would be very bad news. But Jesus didn't stay dead. His death is not the end of the story. He knew that he was going to die. It was prophesied that he was going to die, and he chose to die. So why? Why did Jesus die? Because he was killed. I know you're pretending to be two, but we just went over this. Jesus died because he chose to die. He knew Judas was going to betray him. It was prophesied. He knew he was going to be arrested and crucified. He could have defended himself against the accusations that chief priests made, but he didn't. He could have called armies of angels to defend him, but he didn't. Jesus chose to die. So why? Why did Jesus choose to die? We'll get there. Wait is not a 2-year-old's favorite word, but hold on to your horses. For now, let's get into groups as much as we can and discuss these two questions, these two types of whys. In groups, let's pretend that we're two, and without all the accumulated knowledge that we may or may not have, ask each other why. Why did Jesus die? Why did Jesus choose to die? Why? So, yeah, today we're going to talk about Jesus' death through the use of a plot. Not the conspiracy plot, but the type of plot of a story, because John's gospel is beautifully written. When Gord preached 2 weeks ago, he told John's story about Peter's denials of Jesus and the reconciliation that Peter had with Jesus. And Gord told exactly the story that John told. John didn't tell it in one piece. Gord told it as part of his own story, but in the Gospel of John, it's one story. John's entire gospel was written to tell one bigger story. It was written to tell the story of Jesus and the story of the people that he encounters. And today, the story that we're looking at is a story of how Pilate encounters Jesus. For those of you who don't know, Pilate, also known as Pontius Pilate because he was from the Ponti family, was the Roman appointed governor of Judea. Judea was the province where Jesus was born, where he lived, and where he died. Pilate had authority on Rome's behalf over the governance of the province, including military and monetary. We know he was a real person, and we actually have coins from the time that he was the governor of Judea. And we know they're his coins because they have his name on them. Today, Pilate is the main character of our story. I say that slightly tongue-in-cheek because Pilate is the main character of our story in the same way that Watson is the main character of a Sherlock Holmes novel. He's not actually there, we were there to see. He's just the one that we as the audience identify with, and he's the one who we see the story through. Pilate, like Watson, is the narrator. He's how we get to experience the encounter with Jesus. And Pilate experiences his own story through his encounter with Jesus. Like all main characters, Pilate has a character arc. Because this is a story about Jesus, Pilate's character arc, how he changes, is the change in how he relates to Jesus. His arc is the way that his relationship with Jesus changes. And he begins our story understanding and relating to Jesus one way, and ends our story understanding and relating to Jesus a bit more deeply. Through the choices he's presented, he both changes and shows his nature. He shows his character. And like all good plots, this plot has a villain. The villain is the driving agent of change in a story. The villain is what forces the hero to act. The villain is what brings the hero to the lowest point that they can go and then demands that the hero submit. The villain creates an environment that reveals the true character of the hero. And so, who is the villain of this story of Pilate's encounter with Jesus? Well, who brought Jesus to Pilate? The immediate villain is who John calls the Jews in our story. But right before we pick up our story, we're told that these Jews are led by the chief priests of the Jewish nation. So, wait a minute. The chief priests? These are leaders of the religion of the Jews, the religion that is founded by God himself, God who called Abraham to follow him and to follow him alone. Why would the leaders of a religion founded by God want to kill the son of the God that they follow? Like all good villains, the Jews are shrouded in mystery. What are their motives? What are their goals? What made them what they are? Can they change? Are they even the real villain? What an insightful bunch of 2-year-olds you are. We'll see how many of these questions we can answer along the way. Now that I've introduced the immediate cast, let's talk about the setting that they're in. Good stories start by giving you a sense of what the world of the story is like. This is called the ordinary world of the story. It's important because as someone who does not live in the world of the story, you and I are not first century Jews living under Roman rule, it isn't always obvious what matters or what things in the story mean. So how do you know what's important? Well, the story should tell you what's important, and it should do that by telling you the background of what's about to change. It should do that by giving you a sense of what the world is like ordinarily. At this point in John's Gospel, we've been in the first century world of Judea for some time. John is a little light on contextual details, but we can get a sense of what's important from the other things that he said and by just a smidge of historical context. At this point, we know that Jesus has been traveling around Judea for about 3 years, and he's preached publicly for that long. He's raised Lazarus from the dead recently, and he entered the city on a donkey. That's called Palm Sunday, just 5 days before. It's the Jewish Passover festival week. It's an early Friday morning. That part doesn't really matter for the specific story. What does matter is that Jesus has been at odds with the Jewish religious leaders for some time. The chief priests paid Judas Iscariot, one of Jesus' disciples, who followed Jesus around for 3 years to betray Jesus. They gave Judas 30 pieces of silver to bring Jesus to them privately so the Jewish religious leaders could kill Jesus. They've been plotting. At this point in the story, the Jewish religious leaders have arrested Jesus and brought him to the high priest's house, their leader. We're picking up our story from the Gospel of John after the Jewish religious leaders leave the high priest's house and bring Jesus to Pilate to be judged and executed. Okay, enough of the setup. Let's get on with the story. Our pieces are in place. Our characters are about to meet. My coffee is missing. Let's see what happens. Now, remember, this is a story about one why that has two parts. Why did Jesus die? And why did Jesus choose to die? So let's read the Gospel according to John, chapter 18, starting at verse 28. For now, though, we're only going to read until verse 30, just 3 verses. And just so we remember where the story is coming from, Caiaphas, who you'll see, is the name of the Jewish high priest. And one more note is that I'm reading from the translation called the English Standard Version today, but any reliable translation is fine. Starting from verse 28. Then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters, so that they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover. So Pilate went outside to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered him, "If this man were not doing evil, we would not have delivered him over to you." What we just read is called the inciting incident of the story. An inciting incident is an event, an incident, that demands a response. It incites. For Pilate, the inciting incident starts when he meets Jesus. This is their first encounter. Jesus is not well known to Pilate, although Pilate has heard of Jesus. It's not recorded exactly what he's heard, but Pilate has heard of him, we are sure. Pilate has never met him before, though. So through this encounter with Jesus, Pilate will come to understand Jesus a little more, and he will have to decide his fate. Now, I don't know what Pilate did with his mornings, but having someone brought to him like this might have been unusual, might even have been a little bit annoying. What do these Jews want so early in the morning? Why are they making me go outside? Why do I have to accommodate their tradition of the Passover? Now, I glossed over a little bit what Passover was in my description of the story's ordinary world, but it is important to our big why questions. We'll get to the deeper questions later, but for now, all we need to understand is that there is a Jewish ritual going on. The Passover was a week-long religious celebration that included a feast and required the Jews to be ritually clean. To be ritually clean, they had to observe certain traditions. Entering Pilate's house would have broken one of those traditions, defiled that ritual cleanliness, and prevented them from taking part in the Passover feast. So they got Pilate to come out to them instead. Pilate obliges them. Now, this inciting incident where Pilate meets Jesus is instigated by the villain, the Jews being led by the chief priests. The inciting incident is completed when the Jews demand that Pilate judge Jesus, and action is required from Pilate. Why are they asking him to judge Jesus? At first, Pilate doesn't know why they demanded this, but it wasn't an unusual ask. Part of Pilate's job as governor was to oversee matters that the Jews didn't have the authority to judge for themselves. So he starts off with a question. What is this man accused of? Fair enough. Maybe he can go back to bed if the Jews should be handling it themselves. The response the Jews give is a strange one. If this man were not doing evil, we would not have delivered him over to you. Evil? Jesus doing evil? What kind of evil? It certainly isn't a direct answer to the question. So why are they being cagey? Why haven't they made an accusation? And why haven't they revealed their motivations? The one thing that the Jews do make clear here is that they want Pilate to judge Jesus. The Jews' request to have Pilate take authority over Jesus' judgment will matter a lot in just a minute. So, why did Jesus die? Because the Jews handed him over to Pilate. Why did Jesus choose to die? For that, we had to keep reading. So let's read the next two verses. John chapter 18, verses 31 and 32. Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." The Jews said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." And this was to fulfill the word that Jesus had spoken to show by what kind of death he was going to die. So here we reach the first complication from Pilate's perspective. The Jews make it clear that they want Pilate to put Jesus to death. They haven't actually accused Jesus of anything, but they've revealed two things. They're not willing to judge Jesus by their own authority, and they want Pilate to use his authority to put Jesus to death. That's some pretty serious stuff. Like, rather villainous, if you ask me. Most stories have complications. Complications are things that stop the character from reaching their goals. Like most stories, Pilate's story wouldn't be very interesting if there weren't any complications. If Pilate had just said, "Oh, I guess the Jews want to kill this guy. Okay, send him off," there'd be no complications. We wouldn't have the same story at all. But that's not what Pilate did. The first complication is that Pilate asked the Jews to judge Jesus by their own law, and they refuse. Pilate's goal of leading an uninterrupted life is complicated by their refusal. But this didn't have to be a complication. Why didn't Pilate just agree to the Jews' demand to have Jesus killed? Why did Pilate bother to ask what crimes that Jesus was accused of? He didn't have to. There might have been some consequences to making an uninformed decision to kill an innocent man based on the demands of the Jews, but he did have the authority to do it. Instead, he tried to understand. Maybe he was only trying to get out of having to make the decision himself. But he did ask what Jesus was guilty of. The response he got made his life a lot more complicated. In the Jews' response, we have the first inkling of the villain's motivation to kill Jesus. Why did Jesus die? Because he was killed. But why was he killed? Because the Jews wanted to kill him. Why did the Jews want to kill him? Whoa, too fast. Jews aren't ready to spill the beans about their motivation yet. They revealed themselves to be the villains in this story, but we don't know what else they want. So we'll get there. We might not have much insight into the Jews' motivations yet, but we do have a bit more insight into our other why. Why did Jesus choose to die? John tells us in chapter 18, verse 32 that we just read, this was to fulfill the word that Jesus had spoken to show by what kind of death he was going to die. What was the fulfillment of Jesus' word? And what word had Jesus spoken? Jesus has previously prophesied about how he was going to die. Twice in John's gospel, Jesus has made a reference to being lifted up. They're made in chapter 3, verse 14, and chapter 12, verse 32. And right after the second prophecy in chapter 12, John explains that this is a prophecy about how Jesus is going to die, that Jesus is prophesying his death. And death by Pilate's hands means crucifixion. If Pilate's authority kills Jesus, then Jesus will be nailed to a cross and lifted up. The Jews would have killed him by stoning. No, there are no drugs involved. That's just repeatedly throwing rocks at someone. Death by stoning wouldn't have fulfilled Jesus' prophecy about being lifted up. There are also other prophecies that Jesus makes about his death, both in the Gospel according to John and the Gospels according to Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's comprehensive. Okay. So Jesus knew he was going to die. But why did he choose to die? Let me read one of the verses from John to show what Jesus said was his purpose for his death. John chapter 12, verse 32 says, "And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself." Why did Jesus choose to die? To draw all people to himself. Let's keep reading. So let's take a look at the second complication that Pilate encounters on his quest to live an uninterrupted life. So hold on to your hats this time. We're going farther. Let's read John chapter 18 from verse 33 all the way to the end of the chapter at verse 40. starting at verse 33. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from this world." Then Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" After he had said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, "I find no guilt in him. But you have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover. So do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" They cried out again, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber. Pilate starts off, again, by trying to understand what Jesus is about. He's not going to crucify an innocent man, at least not without looking into it a little. Pilate asks Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus' response is somewhat surprising. It's indirect. He doesn't immediately confirm or deny. Instead, he turns the question back on Pilate. First, why did Pilate ask this question? It's recorded in the Gospel according to Luke that the Jews had accused Jesus of claiming to be a king before Pilate asked whether he is the king of the Jews, but the Jews don't claim that he is their king, only that he claims to be Christ, a king. So Pilate isn't repeating their words exactly. Either he heard the phrase somewhere else, and that's not recorded, or he's synthesizing information together from what he's heard. So when Jesus asks him back the question, "Do you say this of your own accord?" the honest answer is yes, he did. Pilate deflects, but he did say it of his own accord, at least a little. Even if he heard it somewhere, Pilate understands that this phrase might apply to Jesus. He's getting a little closer to understanding who Jesus is, although it's likely that at this point, Pilate understands King of the Jews to be a political leader. So Pilate starts the conversation by trying to understand if Jesus views himself as the political king of the Jews. So why start there? Being an earthly king would put Jesus in opposition to Caesar. If Jesus were the king of the Jews, as Pilate understands it, Pilate would be justified in crucifying him. That would be a rebellion. Maybe Pilate would even have to crucify him or appear in rebellion against Rome himself. That's a pretty big deal. In part to show how big a deal Jesus being the king of the Jews is, John introduces a new person in verse 40, Barabbas. In John's account of this story, Barabbas is here for exactly one verse, but he serves at least two purposes. The first purpose for our plot is to show why Jesus chose to die, and the second purpose for our plot is to show why Jesus died. So starting with why Jesus chose to die, we saw that it was to draw all people to himself. Isn't that what a king does? So why doesn't Jesus just admit to being a king? What would it mean if Jesus told Pilate just now that he was the king of the Jews? He deserved the title, and one of the wise men that came to see Jesus when Jesus was still a little child called him the king of the Jews. So why didn't Jesus admit to being a king? Barabbas shows us one reason why. Well, the translation of the Gospel according to John that I just read called Barabbas a robber. Other translations of John's Gospel call him an insurrectionist. The Gospel according to Luke also says, in my translation, that Barabbas had started an insurrection and killed people. Barabbas might not have thought of himself as a king, but he was exactly the kind of rebellious figure that would need to be crucified to show Rome's authority. So if Jesus admits to being king of the Jews, then Pilate can crucify him with a clean conscience. Well, as clean a conscience as someone condemning another person to death on a cross can have, since that's where the word excruciating comes from, after all. But for Pilate, releasing Barabbas would be a smart move if he could crucify someone who was a worse rebel than Barabbas was. But Jesus doesn't admit to being king of the Jews. Why? What does he say instead? In John chapter 18, verse 36, he says, "My kingdom is not of this world." Pilate presses him more and asks, "So you are a king?" But Jesus switches the subject. He doesn't deny being a king, but he says that his purpose is to bear witness to the truth. He says that those who are of the truth will listen to him, and his purpose is not to create a political kingdom, and his kingdom is not limited to the Jews. So why did Jesus choose to die? Because he came to draw all people to himself, and because he came to bear witness to the truth and call those who are of the truth. So after that exchange, why did Pilate go and tell the crowd that Jesus was innocent? Pilate scoffed at Jesus' response. What is truth? Perhaps Pilate just thought that Jesus was crazy. But Pilate understood that Jesus didn't consider himself a king set in opposition to Caesar. He got a little bit closer to understanding Jesus. He tried to release Jesus. Now, Barabbas also serves one other point. He illustrates the motives of the Jews. Why did Jesus die? Why did the Jews demand the release of Barabbas when they could have freed an innocent man instead? If the Jews were attempting to be good Roman citizens, demanding Barabbas is a highly suspicious move. Why would they demand someone who started a rebellion? The motivation of the Jews probably isn't to obey Rome's authority. If the Jews were attempting to be moral, why would they choose a murderer? Their only accusation in John's gospel so far is that Jesus was doing evil. So either Barabbas had done less evil than Jesus, or this motive is suspect too. Given that they haven't accused Jesus of any murders, and we know that Jesus didn't commit any crimes at all, the motivation of the Jews can't be that they want to do what's right. So why did the Jews demand Barabbas instead of Jesus? Let's take one step back. Why are they even allowed to demand the release of a prisoner that Rome's authority, through Pilate, has said should die? Pilate cites a custom that is the release of a single man at the Passover. I guess married men were out of luck. But why is there a tradition to release a prisoner on the Passover? So Passover started when the nation of Israel, the Jews before they were called Jews, were, as a whole nation, slaves to the Egyptians. It serves to remember the time when God called the Jews out of Egypt, away from slavery, through the miracles known as the 10 plagues. The festival is called Passover because it was a ritual that caused the last plague to pass over the house where the ritual was performed. The plague wouldn't affect the house. But what does that have to do with releasing a prisoner? The last plague was the death of the firstborn. Every firstborn, animals included. The Jews were told to perform the Passover ritual to avoid this plague. They were told to kill a lamb as a sacrifice instead and put the lamb's blood on the doorpost of the house. By being obedient to what God had commanded, they would be passed over. But if a house was disobedient and didn't perform the Passover ritual, the firstborn of that house would die just like the firstborn of the Egyptians. If a person was obedient to what God commanded them to do, to avoid the plague, and they sacrificed the lamb, they marked their home with it, then God would not treat them like the Egyptians. God would treat them as one of his own, and he would pass over that house during the judgment. The tradition to release a prisoner on the Passover, to withhold judgment of that prisoner, mirrors the tradition for God to pass over the Jews. In both cases, a person is spared from judgment and punishment by death. So why did Jesus die? Because he was killed, because the Jews wanted to kill him, because the Jews chose to pass over a guilty man and condemn an innocent one. Why? It still doesn't make any sense. But one thing is becoming clear: they're not acting like the God they claim to serve. Remember, the Jews here are led by the chief priests. The priests should know better than anyone the importance of the Passover and what it means for God to have given them a way to avoid judgment and death. But they chose Barabbas over Jesus. They passed over guilt and condemned the guiltless. Now, Barabbas serves one more purpose in our plot that I didn't mention before. He complicates Pilate's life. Pilate still hasn't found a way to avoid crucifying an innocent man. So let's see what he tries next. Will he give in? Let's read John chapter 19, verses 1 to 11. Then Pilate took Jesus and flogged him. And the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head and arrayed him in a purple robe. They came up to him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," and struck him with their hands. Pilate went out again and said to them, "See, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no guilt in him." So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." When the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to that law he ought to die, because he has made himself the Son of God." When Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. He entered his headquarters again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "You will not speak to me? Do you not know that I have the authority to release you and the authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, he who delivered you over to me, or me over to you, has the greater sin." So why does Pilate have Jesus flogged in verse 1 here? He hasn't found any more guilt in Jesus between the end of chapter 18 and the beginning of chapter 19, has he? No. He says in both verse 4 and verse 6 of chapter 19, after presenting the flogged and mocked Jesus, that he still finds no guilt in Jesus. So why does Pilate have Jesus flogged? As a brief historical interlude, the Roman practice of flogging was a short, multi-pronged whip that had little metal balls on it. The severity of the beating is thought to have contributed to the rapidity of Jesus' death on the cross. It wasn't a kind thing to do to an innocent man. So why does Pilate flog an innocent man? He's trying to appease the crowd. He's trying to get them to be satisfied and go home, or at least take Jesus and judge him by their own law, so that Pilate doesn't have to use his own authority to kill Jesus. But the Jews will not be placated. They call again for Jesus' crucifixion. Why did Jesus die? If the Jews had been upset at Jesus for claiming to be the king of the Jews, Pilate's flogging and humiliation of Jesus should have satisfied them. The soldiers dressed Jesus in a painful cap of thorns to mimic a crown, and a purple robe that would quickly become bloody to mimic a royal outfit. It's harsh, it's painful, and it's humiliating. Nobody would follow a king like that after what Pilate did to him. But the Jews are not satisfied. Instead, they escalate the accusations they make against Jesus. In verse 7, the Jews claim that Jesus had made himself the Son of God. What does that mean? This is a much more severe claim than a political uprising. The Jews are not wrong about their own law. To claim to be God, which is what they understand the term Son of God to mean, would have been blasphemy. It was an action deserving of death according to their own law. But why does Pilate react the way he does? He doesn't follow their laws. Now, John doesn't record every detail of how people act or react, but he does capture this detail about Pilate. He was even more afraid. We can infer that Pilate was afraid of the mobs to some extent. He's trying to placate them, after all. But now he is more afraid. Why is he afraid? It's possible that Pilate is sensitive to the term Son of God, since Roman emperors at the time had called themselves sons of God to indicate that they had inherited Julius Caesar's power. But Pilate's already determined that Jesus isn't a political threat. Jesus has said his kingdom isn't of this world. There are none of Jesus' servants fighting violently for his freedom. So why is Pilate afraid? To be honest, we don't know. But we can tell that Pilate has changed by the way that he asks Jesus questions. Pilate seems to have had a shift in how he views Jesus. Instead of asking Jesus what he's done, he asked Jesus about his origin. Where are you from? When Jesus doesn't answer, Pilate urges Jesus to speak so that he can have an opportunity to release him. Pilate is feeling trapped by the Jews, but he's looking for a way out for Jesus. Now, Jesus doesn't respond. Why doesn't Jesus respond? Why does Jesus choose to die? Jesus tells Pilate plainly in verse 11 that you would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given you from above. Somebody had given Pilate authority. Jesus, as the Son of God, also had authority. But he wasn't using it here. Why not? Why did Jesus choose to die? And there are two ways to take Jesus' statement about Pilate's authority. The first way to take the statement is that Jesus is talking about governmental authority and how Pilate's authority to release or crucify Jesus comes from Rome. This is a true statement, but it's not an important statement at the moment. We know that Jesus is not here because he's in opposition to Rome. Even Pilate knows that. Jesus is here because he is in opposition to a different authority. The second way to take Jesus' statement is that Jesus is talking about divine authority, the kind of authority that comes from God. But God wouldn't authorize the death of his own son, would he? But on the other hand, why wouldn't God use his authority to save his own son from crucifixion? It's quite a conundrum. Why did Jesus choose to die? Whose authority is Jesus under? The authority that was given to Pilate. We can puzzle this out. We have to look for a few more clues. So first, let's lay out what we know. God is the source of authority. Jesus, as the Son of God, perfectly respects God's authority. God, as an authority, authorizes things that reflect his character, forbids things that go against his character. You could even say that God's character is revealed by the things that he authorizes and forbids. We can tell that God isn't directing the Jews to call for Jesus' death because they're not reflecting God's character at all. They want to kill an innocent man. On Pilate's side, he doesn't want to kill an innocent man, but neither is he willing to risk himself to protect Jesus. He's self-interested and self-preserving. That doesn't reflect God's character either. So, what is motivating Pilate? Where does his authority come from? And if we read through the Gospel of John, we find this verse in chapter 12. Verse 31 of John chapter 12 is a quote from Jesus where he says, "Now is the judgment of the world. Now will the ruler of this world be cast out." Who is Jesus referring to? Certainly not Rome. And it can't be God because the Son of God wouldn't be opposed to his Father. So who is it? Who is the ruler of this world? The Gospel of Luke records an interaction between Jesus and a character named Satan after Jesus has spent 40 days in the desert without food. I really appreciate the note that he was hungry. Here, Satan is called the devil. This is part of what happens from Luke chapter 4, verses 5 to 7. And the devil took him up and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. And he said to him, "To you I will give all this authority and their glory, for it has been delivered to me, and I give it to whom I will. If you then will worship me, it will all be yours." Now there are two major points here in Satan's words. The first point is that all this authority has been delivered to me. Satan claims to have authority over all the kingdoms of the world. And when Jesus responds, he doesn't contradict Satan. Satan's claim to have authority over the world is true. The second point is that Satan says, all this authority has been delivered to me. But did you catch that? The second part this time, not the first. He said, has been delivered to me. Satan admits that he's not the source of authority. He had authority at the time, but it was given to him. God is still the ultimate source of authority. Note that this isn't to say that Satan reflects God's character when he uses his authority. Satan is in opposition to God. In fact, the name Satan is the Hebrew word for adversary. But God still gave him authority. God delivered authority to Satan. Why would God do that? Why would God give his authority to someone that doesn't represent his character and then allow them to give that authority to Pilate to have the capability to kill Jesus? Why did Jesus choose to die? Let's take a bit of a breather before we go that far down. Okay, so to recap what we've covered so far, where are we in the story? The Jews, led by the chief priests, have brought Jesus to Pilate to be killed by crucifixion. They've accused Jesus of doing evil. They chose to release the guilty Barabbas instead of the innocent Jesus, and they've accused Jesus of blasphemy since he said he was the Son of God. Pilate has found Jesus innocent, but had Jesus flogged and mocked to appease the Jews. It didn't work. Then Pilate reminds Jesus that it's Pilate's authority that can set Jesus free, And Jesus reminds Pilate that it was Jesus' authority that gave Pilate authority in the first place. Pilate was given authority through Rome, which is under Satan's authority, and Satan was given authority by God. Why did Jesus die? Because he was killed. Because the Jews wanted to kill him. Because the Jews chose to pass over a guilty man and condemn an innocent one. Because the Jews were acting on an authority that is opposed to God. Why did Jesus choose to die? Because he came to draw all people to himself. Because he came to bear witness to the truth, to call those who are of the truth. Because he gave away his authority. Now we can get to the good stuff. We've uncovered the villain behind the villain. Satan's pulling the strings behind the scenes on both sides of the conflict. And Pilate's reaching the end of his rope, and the crowds are getting louder. Jesus is still innocent, and he still refuses to defend himself. So how will Pilate use his authority? Will he free an innocent man, or will he succumb to the pressure? This is what's called the crisis and the climax of the story. Let's find out. Let's read the rest of Pilate's story now, from John chapter 19, verse 12 to verse 16. From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement, and in Aramaic, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. He said to the Jews, "Behold your king." And they cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" And Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" And the chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So he delivered him over to them to be crucified. Pilate condemns Jesus to death. I had such hopes, and they were dashed. At first, Pilate wants to release Jesus. The Jews oppose him as they have before, but there is one difference here. The chief priests finish off their arguments with a claim that they have no king but Caesar. I almost don't know what to say to that. It's such a reversal of the proper order. It's done by the people who are supposed to be in charge of the Jewish nation, the chief priests. The Jewish nation was designed by God in the Old Testament to exist without a king. The mediators of the law and the mediators of God's relationship to his people were the priests. There was no need for a king because God's law and his priesthood kept the nation safe and moral. It didn't last, but it was how it was designed. No wonder it didn't last. The chief priests, who should know God better than anyone, just claimed that Caesar was their only king, and they did it in order to kill the son of their God. There are almost no words for that. Surely, if there was ever a way to say that someone was acting on Satan's authority as his representative, that's it. Whether they knew it or not, they're fulfilling Satan's purposes. Why did Jesus die? Because he was killed. Because the Jews wanted to kill him. Because the Jews chose to pass over a guilty man and condemn an innocent one. Because the Jews were acting on Satan's authority. Because the priests who were supposed to mediate between God and mankind turned their backs on God. But why did Jesus choose to die? If he claimed to be overthrowing the ruler of this world, why did he let himself die under that ruler's authority? And why did Pilate use his authority to accomplish Satan's purpose of killing Jesus? That brings us to the resolution of our story. Now, this is a great story, but it's not an edge-of-your-seat action movie starring Vin Diesel. For one, I have way too much hair. And for two, this is a personal encounter between one man with delegated authority and the Son of God. So to understand the meaning of Pilate's actions, to understand why Satan wants Jesus to die, we need to understand where the conflict between Jesus and Satan comes from. So let's take just a minute to understand the background. Let's go back to the original conflict between God and Satan, all the way back. The first conflict that we have recorded is in the first book of the Bible, Genesis. It's in chapter 3. This might seem a bit far away from Pilate's encounter with Jesus, but I promise this relates. My wife, Marianne, and I have an ongoing feud about stories that introduce multiple characters with multiple plot lines. She likes them because she trusts the author is going to bring them together in a meaningful way. Part of the fun is waiting to see how they come together, but I think most people do them badly, and I usually get bored. If the Bible were a story I'd written, I would be tempted to stop reading. And if this were, oh, it is a sermon I've written, I'd be tempted to stop listening. Introducing another plot line at this point, no thanks. But the Bible is not a story I've written. God wrote that story. And the Bible tells the story that God wrote, and it starts with Genesis. All of the stories in the Bible tie together in the story of Jesus, and all of the stories in the Bible start in Genesis. So if you want to know why Jesus chose to die, we need to know why the story started. We need to go back to Genesis. The ordinary world for the conflict in Genesis 3 is that God created the heavens and the earth, and Adam and Eve in a garden with him. Everything was very good. And God walked in the garden and shared space and time and fellowship with Adam and Eve. God and man were not separated from each other. There is one character who is in opposition to God here. It's still Satan. In the story, he takes the form of a serpent. Then in Genesis chapter 3, the inciting incident of this conflict is when Eve gets tempted by the serpent to eat the fruit from the tree that God said not to. It was the one and only rule that God had asked Adam and Eve to follow. The conflict gets complicated when the serpent promises that eating the fruit will make them like God. They'll know good and evil for themselves. They'll have their own authority. The crisis and climax of this conflict are when Eve decides she would rather be wise than obey God, and Adam decides to listen to Eve's voice rather than obey God. They eat the fruit. The resolution of this conflict is that they are both ashamed and they hide from God. God removes them from the garden and from his presence, and the relationship between God and mankind is broken. And all of this started because Satan used his authority to oppose God. But why did God give Satan authority in the first place? If only we had time to answer that. You've been a great 2-year-old, though. For now, all we need to know is that God did give Satan authority. But our part, our use of authority, is still our responsibility, not Satan's. God held Adam and Eve responsible for their actions, Satan responsible for his actions, and he holds us responsible for our actions. So why did Jesus choose to die? Why was mankind separated from God? Because Adam listened to the voice of Eve, who was acting according to Satan's deception, and they both acted according to their own authority. And why did Jesus die? Why did Pilate side with Satan against Jesus? Because Pilate listened to the voices of the Jews, who were acting according to Satan's authority, and Pilate acted according to their authority. But is Pilate really responsible for Jesus' death? Didn't he try not to side with Satan, and he tried not to kill Jesus? Pilate did try to get out of using his authority to kill Jesus, but it didn't work. In the Gospel according to Matthew, it's recorded that he washed his hands and said that he was innocent of Jesus' blood. But he's not innocent. Authority was delegated to him, and he used it to kill Jesus. In the Gospel according to Luke, it's recorded that Pilate decided that their demand should be granted. He tried not to, but he did. He didn't hate Jesus, but neither did he choose Jesus. He chose indifference. And he killed the Son of God. Personally, I think I relate to Pilate a lot more than the Jews, because it's hard to hate, but I am indifferent. That doesn't make me any better than the Jews who turned their back on God and killed Jesus. I need Jesus' death so that God passes over my indifference just as much as if I were full of hate. I need Jesus to act as that Passover lamb from the ritual so long ago, and whose death saves me from God's judgment. Why did Jesus choose to die? And why did Jesus choose to die at the authority of the adversary of God from the very beginning? Because it was necessary. Jesus died because he wanted to draw all people to himself, which was necessary because mankind was separated from him. We are separated from him. Jesus died because he came to bear witness to the truth, to call those who are of the truth, which was necessary because mankind chose our own truth and hid from him. We choose our own truth and hide. Jesus died because he gave away his authority, which was necessary because mankind's rejection of God's authority required a perfect sacrifice to have our guilt be passed over. Our rejection of God's authority, even our indifference, makes us guilty. Jesus died because we use our authority to live apart from him. Jesus chose to die because God is a just God and requires our guilt to be passed over rather than ignored. But that's not the whole story. There's one big reason that Jesus chose to die that doesn't come up in the story of how Pilate encounters Jesus. But no explanation of why Jesus died would be complete without it. Jesus chose to die because he loves us and doesn't want us to be separated from him. John tells us this in John chapter 3, verse 16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. Jesus died so that we can live with him now, before we die, and after we die. Eternal life starts now. All we have to do is surrender our own authority, listen to his voice, and allow him to be the king of our life. Why did Jesus die? Because he was killed. Let's pray. God, thank you for the good news. The good news is that the kingdom of heaven is here, that Jesus has made it possible for us to be part of that, to be part of it now, to be passed over, to be reunited with you. And please help us to respond properly, to release our own authority that has caused so much pain in the world, and even to release our indifference and not to be like Pilate. Thank you, God. Amen.